Okay, welcome to Chalmers, everyone. Very happy to see so many of you here. I guess a lot of people are interested in waste. I guess even more people are interested in sustainability, and even yet more interested in Isabel herself, perhaps. Today, Isabel Ordóñez Pizarro will defend her thesis, Designing Out Waste. First, I would like to introduce some persons of interest during this process. Perhaps you're wondering who I am, and I'm Oskar Rexfeldt, associate professor at the PPU department here at Chalmers, and I'm also the main supervisor of Isabel. We have some other persons as well. We have the opponent, who is senior lecturer Maria José Zapata from University of Gothenburg. Great. And then we have the grading committee, who will decide whether or not Isabel has passed this exam. And that is Professor Ursula Tischner, CEO of eConcept, the Agency for Sustainable Design in Cologne, Germany, who also teach sustainable design at FH Johannum in Austria. And then we have Arne Remmen, professor at Aalborg University in Denmark, with a vast research experience in sustainability. And we have a representative of the Chalmers faculty, Maria Ljunggren Söderman, senior researcher at Environmental Systems Analysis. And we also have, well, I don't think you will be needed now, Jonas, because we have the three members of the grading committee. But in case anything would happen to you three, Jonas Nässén, senior researcher at Energy and Environment at Chalmers, will cover for you. Great. Also present is Isabel's examiner, Professor Marianne Karlsson, and Isabel's assistant supervisor, adjunct Professor Stig Franzén, both of them from the PPU department here at Chalmers. I would also like to mention Ulrike Rae, and who I know is not here, and Theodora Rettigan, who have helped in supervising Isabel in the past. So those were the main characters here. And this is how we're going to do it. Isabel will first present her research for about 30 minutes or so. And then we will have a little mini break in case someone needs to leave to do other things. You can do so without your ears turning red during the procedure. And we will also get the opponent, Maria José, in position during this little break. Then the opponent, Maria, will ask questions, and Isabel will try to answer them, basically, and they will discuss the topic and Isabel's research. This part can often take an hour or a little bit more, but it's completely up to the opponent how long she wishes to continue. And this part is also exclusive to Isabel and Maria José. It's a discussion between them. When Maria José is satisfied, we will leave the word to the grading committee, who will be given the opportunity to ask questions and comment on Isabel's research. And finally, everyone in the audience are invited to do the same thing. When the audience is satisfied, the academic part of this afternoon is over for most of us, and the gastronomic part starts. And you will be invited to food and drinks at our department, while the grading committee retire to the secret room to decide whether or not to pass Isabel. All right. So, That concludes the introduction, and now it's time for the main person, Isabel, to present her research.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? No. The sound technician says. Now? Okay. Thank you very much. It's lovely to see so many of you here. We are recording this, so my parents at home can see it. Hi, Mom. So just so you know. I'm going to present my thesis, Designing Out Waste. And first I want to say, why did I do a PhD? And it's basically because I like puzzles. I like how independent pieces fit together to form a whole that's bigger than themselves. And for me, design, industrial design, is like making puzzle pieces, where you connect users to desired activity, or you connect materials to different production systems. And it's the satisfaction of a perfect fit that makes me want to do design. And I think that joy in a product well thought out is something that a lot of people enjoy and want to strive to make more of. On the other hand, I like nature a lot. I consider myself to be an environmentally aware person, and I do believe that Industrial Revolution and industrial designers putting out products all the time has actually undermined nature and degraded it to an extent that is not really acceptable. And the problem is that we make a lot of puzzle pieces that don't necessarily fit into nature's puzzle. And it's when these bottles that are well thought out, or they're very smart for transporting liquids, when they're in a beach like this, they don't contribute to anything, and they start breaking the puzzle apart, rather. And we make a lot of it. We have increasing waste volumes for a long term, and it's only expected to increase more. So there is definitely something that has to be done. And in specific cases with electronic waste, or in this case batteries, we're using rare materials that are becoming more and more scarce in the environment where we're taking them out from. And instead we're piling them up in landfills. And it's basically the side effects of a linear production model like this, where we take material resources from the environment to make raw materials to be able to manufacture goods that are then used and later discarded into the waste management system. In the best case scenario, we would get them to be managed properly and in a way that doesn't harm the environment. But still, this take, make, and waste model is piling up things here that we would want to actually recirculate and have useful again in the production system. And this has been proposed from several schools of thoughts. Industrial ecology started focusing mainly on the waste generated in production and saying that one industry's waste can be another industry's input material. And through these symbiotic relationships, different industrial networks can actually minimize their waste output. Then cradle to cradle says like the products that come after they've been used can be taken back to the production phase and disassembled to be able to make new products. The circular economy takes these both initiatives and also says, yes, and we have to recirculate things from the waste streams. But the sustainable waste management has been trying to recirculate materials through recycling and has been very successful with the large volumes of materials into material recycling. So this is not really new. But why don't we have a circular system yet? And that's basically what I've been thinking about for the last 5 years. Specifically phrased it, what hinders material recirculation in practice? And who is this interesting for? It's interesting for the initiators. It can be designers like me that want to do product development without environmental damage, or it can be people that define how production systems look or how waste systems are going to operate and want to get things moving. So it's the doers that I think will be interested in this sort of research. And since the question was what hinders material recirculation, the natural starting point was here. What is not being recirculated? What is actually ending up in the landfill and not being useful? And even though industrial waste is a big chunk of what gets discarded, I personally have chosen more to look at household waste because of the fast-moving consumer goods is something that I've found more close to my discipline. But also because it's a more complex fraction. It has much more difficulties because we're mixing up much more materials in that. I expect industrial waste to be able to be overcome with industrial ecology and more strict laws around production, and actually, since they're cleaner fractions, they're one type of material, it'll be easier to be able to think a way out of them. So that's the starting point. We have a production system that generates materials or goods that are used, then are discarded into a waste management system. This is kind of the backbone of all the presentation and the research I've done. So we want to connect waste management back into production. And here the first question I asked was, is it possible to design with waste? Is it done? Who's done it? How have they done it? How can we make it easier for people to design with waste material? And then the second question was, wait, but what is the material that is coming into the waste system? So how is design sorting affecting this? And personally, since I'm an industrial designer, I was interested to know how designers understand and work with waste. How do they see that their profession influences the generation of waste volumes or the minimization of waste in any case? So these three questions are what drive the three topics that make up my thesis. And together, the three topics present a picture of a current material recirculation state. They give like a little snapshot of what recirculation is today. And what I've done is I've gone through these three topics and looked at what makes it difficult, what are the existing barriers, and how can they be improved. This is also very rooted in my professional formation as an industrial designer. You want to describe things to be able to propose, to generate change. So that's been the way I've done research or approached research. So I'm going to present the different topics to you, and then together I'm going to show you how they make an image for what underlying barriers are there for material recirculation as a whole, and some suggestions to overcome that. So this is the outline for today. I'm going to go through the topics briefly, then a little bit of this transversal analysis to end up with some concluding reflections. So we'll get started with the topics. First, designing with waste. This picture says it all. This is part of a hairdryer. These flakes are actually from the plastic fraction of electronic waste after it's been shredded and processed and the materials have been separated, that then has been cleaned, filtered, and reprocessed in a PhD, double PhD that Sandra Tostar and Erik Stenvall were involved in to evaluate the possibilities of this fraction, this renewed material that you can then use to make products, like in this case, the paperclip. So what we did three studies, basically. First, we looked at products made with waste that were available in the market, and we wanted to know how it was done, how they had come to design with waste. We didn't get much information on how it was done because designers don't really talk about their process that much. So then we had 6 thesis projects where design students were using materials from Stena Recycling to be able to do product development. This was done in a project called Waste to Design. That was a collaboration between Semcon, Stena Recycling, and Chalmers. And so we observed their process there. And when we were done with that, we learned about a similar project done in India, where students also designed with waste materials. So we compared both studies to see if our results were common. And this collage illustrates the results from the theses in Sweden, and then also shows the materials that they were using. PVC from cable sleevings, polyurethane foam, the plastic fraction from electronic waste, and an industrial waste fraction there. And these are the results from some of the Indian students. The main differences was that the project in India was not working with an industrial recycler. So the students themselves went to the landfill to collect the material, choose the material, and clean it themselves. And they were asked to aim for manual fabrication, so local communities could be benefited from their suggestions. So what we found out is that the process of designing with waste is longer than just the process of designing, and you need to have a pre-process. What you have is, this is what normal design process looks like, according to the theory. You have some idea, some challenge that you know you want to address. That is a starting point where a designer would generate ideas to then choose from these ideas to be able to develop this further. And then they iterate that until they come to a final product. But now we're asking them to start with a material. We didn't suggest any product. So they had to analyze the material, suggest ideas of how this material could be used, and then choose from those ideas. And this difference in the starting point was very difficult to handle in some cases for the students. The main barriers we found with designing with waste was that the material that they had to use was irregular. And there's no going around this. Secondary material is irregular. And on top of that, there's little reliable information about the material. We have a lot of material information for virgin materials, but secondary material is not that available, and then you find sources that are contradicting, you don't know what you can trust. And then the lack of a traditional design brief, that they didn't know the starting point, what's the challenge that I have to address? I just have this material. I don't know what I need to solve. So to facilitate this, well, we described how we observed that it's done. When we started out, this description of how to design with waste did not exist. So we think that by describing it and helping more people test it and move along it, then it might be made easier. And the two steps here, collecting and sorting the material adequately, and then investigating and testing the material properties, would benefit of being done before the design with waste process starts. And by material experts or by people in the waste management branch, so the designer doesn't have to do these additional steps. So they can just focus on analyzing, ideating, and then screening. Moving on to topic 2, waste sorting. Here we focused mainly on household waste from apartment buildings. And we did a series of case studies together with Poseidon, Renova, Kretslopp og Vatten, and Lars Smedlund was also involved. And we did a literature review. We wanted to know what makes waste sorting difficult. And the literature says that apartment buildings is harder to get people engaged in waste sorting, so we targeted that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the studies. When you're in the field observations, you get to see lovely things like this. The tree is in the paper and cardboard recycling. There is an intention here. There is a wish that this cellulose goes to a use again. And this illustrates how the system, in many cases, does not fit the materials or the products that the people want to discard. And this mismatch makes it people either don't rely on the system or just put things wherever, or with an intention, but that won't really get fulfilled along the way. What we found in this study, the first study, we just observed how sorting is. And we found in the mixed waste, most of the materials could have been sorted. 40% was biodegradable waste, and 25% was packaging, paper and plastic mostly, that could be sorted in the same room, but they weren't. So in the next study, we focused on biodegradable waste, and we tested here the new bag developed by Lasse Smedlund that you could close like an envelope to see if the containers were kept cleaner. We also took away the lid for these containers in the waste sorting rooms, and we wanted to see if the containers were cleaner and the overall experience changed. We also wanted to see if the amount of flies changed, so actually counting flies on a wall for several hours, so not getting much information out of it. And it does affect, everything does affect behavior. So, but the conclusions of this study and the next one are not completely there yet, so I won't continue on that line. But the main barriers is that central collection in these apartment buildings provides anonymity. And that makes feedback on how the behavior is done diffuse. I can say, this building had this mistake, but I can't really help you improve your sorting. I can't even tell you if you're doing it wrong, because I don't know in the central group who it is that is doing the sorting. Then, since it's a common infrastructure, there is a tragedy of the commons. No one necessarily takes responsibility. If somebody else is making a mess out of it, you don't really feel that you have to make such of an effort. And then the categories that the system provides do not necessarily match what the users want to throw away. So, to improve sorting, you need to provide convenient infrastructure. Sounds pretty simple, but convenient infrastructure is very context dependent and even user dependent. This is how we sort waste at our house. This, you see the paper packaging here, plastic in the middle, and that's mixed waste in the end. And this has changed in every flat we've had. Where do you put the bags? Which bag you use for what? And to be able to understand what is convenient for the user, you really need to understand the user. And to understand the user, it would be very helpful to have professionals from a design discipline that are used to thinking about the user in the use scenario. The third study, and last, so we're getting there, ways to design. Here, we started off with an interview study where we interviewed people from waste management industry and designers that had worked actively with waste. And I wanted to know how they relate, how they see that the design profession affects waste generation. They provided several examples of what they considered good recirculation, and then we analyzed these examples to be able to compare it to what the literature proposes for recirculation. And to complement the view of these designers that had worked actively with waste, we did a web survey to get responses from designers that maybe had not worked with waste before. And these are some of the products that came up as good examples, and we compared them to the literature. The most interesting thing here is that most of the products are using a material for something completely different. We have magnetic tape from VHS tapes being used for making handbags. And this is not what the circular economy proposes, that a same industry takes back their own materials. The starting point is that the same company will do their recirculation. And most of the examples here do not fit that model. So the main barriers we saw is that the designers describe a partial understanding and instruction relation to waste. They all see that there is a relation, and they describe it in different ways. Even some designers lack an interest in it, with 1/3 of all designers that responded to the survey saying that they had not used end-of-life consideration when they did their last project, and that they were not interested in it. And because you have tight time schedules in the product development phase, you prioritize other aspects. The aspects that are on the design brief get prioritized over other aspects that you might be interested in. So in order to facilitate this, I think that if designers can get a better understanding of how their decisions affect waste generation, what are the possible recovery routes, and what actors are involved in these routes, and how to consider these actors, it would make it easier for them to be able to work with recirculation. And in this topic in the thesis, we propose 2 models that I hope help designers understand these topics better. Transversal analysis. So as you see here, I took all the topics and then said, what were the barriers that I saw? What were the suggestions I made? And do these have any sort of common themes underlying them? So we came with underlying barriers for material recirculation, that if you start off with the model that we want to have, the recirculating system, when you design with waste, it's unclear who should push for using discards. Is it the recycling industry that should be offering the materials to manufacturers, or is it manufacturers' responsibility to go and figure out what materials are available? Then, when you have the waste sorting in apartment buildings, you have a tragedy of the commons problem that we discussed earlier. And then when designers were asked if they had taken end-of-life considerations, they said no, because other people take care of it in the development process. All these barriers talk about undefined responsibilities. And that is a problem that we are all familiar with. If it's everybody's responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility as well. So we've seen this whenever you have a lot of people involved in something. Another example is that when you design with waste, you have to accept that there's an unavoidable material irregularity. Then when you have waste sorting in apartment buildings and you're collecting the waste centrally, you have an aggregated waste that you have no way to pinpoint back to who is sorting the waste. And finally, when a designer does a product development and designs for recycling, they lose control of the product after it's made. It's not them that's going to recycle the product, it's somebody else. All these topics talk about lack of control. We've all felt that, kind of like when somebody else is driving and they're going a bit too fast and you're not really entitled to do anything about it. So we have mechanisms to cope with lack of control. The other barriers were found. I'm just going to show you the barriers. The complexity of a sustainable waste management system. Sometimes it's too overwhelming. There's too many materials. There's too many options. And they're being explained in a very difficult way that you don't know how to address. We need material knowledge. It's crucial. And we have material knowledge for virgin materials, but secondary materials is a challenge because of the irregularity. So this is something that has to be addressed. There is lack of information. We have a lot of information, but not all the information we would need to have a well-functioning circular system. And sometimes it might feel like a stretch. It is an additional effort to try to plan for things to come back and recirculating it. But it's an effort that is within our capacities. So together, these 6 barriers are what makes implementing a circular production model difficult. But they're all, in ways, problems that are well known to us. So we could be able to address it. We have tools to address these problems. And they've all been based on the different studies that were a part and one stage of this whole recirculation system. But since together they talk about the same difficulties, it is able to say this is a difficulty for the entire recirculation. So this is, the entire system has these same difficulties, and we should be able to lift our view and remember that we're not just waste sorting, we're recirculating. You know, we're not only doing this, we're part of a bigger system. And that's kind of difficult to do sometimes. So what can we do about it? In the thesis, I suggest 4 regulations that might support material recirculation and a better understanding among actors. We should all get along. Yeah, that's we should all get along. That's basically the final message there. And regulations is all the materials that are being discarded should be able to be recirculated. This is kind of harsh because it means everything we throw away should be able to go back in one way or another. But to do that, we need to know what is coming in. So we need better transparency of the materials that are being used in the production processes. And to be able to ensure some sort of quality standards, we need secondary material quality standards to be able to know how to take in these materials. And all these suggestions have been addressed in one way or another in the European Action Plan for a Circular Economy. They are, in some cases, limited to a specific fraction or restricted in some way, but they are underlyingly there. So that's hopeful. Finally, I also agree with other authors that suggest that recirculation should be required at the design stage. It should be a requirement in the design brief that everybody has to address. So those are the suggestions for recirculation. To the better understanding among actors, I have a particular suggestion that I think might help this. And it's basically to have more designers in the waste management branch. Not because I would like more jobs for designers, which I do, but I think this will have two effects. I think it'll make it easier to take in the user's requirements when you're designing the waste management system. And I also think that it'll facilitate the collaboration with industry, because the designer here will know how the designer there they know their process, so they would be able to collaborate in an easier way. So, the concluding reflections. I'm almost done. It feels, after spending a lot of time on this, it feels that in some cases, production systems and waste management kind of think that they can just pass the ball in between each other. They plan for, we'll do it like this, and it'll come back and we'll be able to do it again. Whereas reality is much more complicated. And today, I don't think that these two branches see each other as dynamic, active actors that they can collaborate with. Rather, they say, I plan for a static waste management, or I plan for a static production system that is not going to change. Whereas when you see that you can change, it's easier to keep the ball rolling. And I think that's a takeaway that I think we should strive for. And then this static versus dynamic is also reflected in a little, there's planned recirculation, when you make things that you know that you're going to get back in a specific way. And there's improvised recirculation, where you haven't planned for it. When you designed it, when they made these windows and washing machines, they weren't thinking about a second use, but there was an infrastructure in place to make them be recirculated by somebody else. And this improvisation is crucial. The planned bit is also crucial. We definitely need that designers plan for recirculating. But the problem is that we plan for recirculation and recirculate a lot of volume through these planned recirculation. But like every plan, they fail. And we have to be able to react to a failed recirculation. And when the failed recirculation is there, that's a great opportunity to get waste management actors and producers to say, okay, why did this happen? How can we work around that? We have to be able to improvise. The case of a Brazilian mechanic that used water-filled PET bottles to generate light bulbs, basically. He generates 55 watts with just having it hanging in the roof. And this recirculation is important, not only because the function that that provides is better than that function maybe, or has more value in specific cases, but because only with a combination of planned and improvised recirculation, we can actually tackle the amount of waste that we're generating. So I would say my main call here is not, of course we have to plan for it, but remember that we also have to be able to improvise. It's not, the plans not always go through. There's a lot of pieces missing in the puzzle still. I hope that the work I've done in the last years kind of helps put some pieces together at least. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think there are some people here who didn't get a copy of Isabel's thesis, but I think you can get in touch with Isabel.
Yeah.
We don't have any extras at the apartment.
No, there's no physical copies left, but there's all digital copies.
Yeah,
that could be
that's even better. So let Isabel know if you are interested in it. Okay, so now it's time for Maria Jose to start the discussion with Isabel. Perhaps not too much Spanish, I hope. It will be kind of difficult for the audience to follow. So please go ahead.
So, Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you to the Department of Product and Production Development for inviting me to be here today. It's an honor to be here and to read it carefully and discuss this thesis. The topic of material recirculation that we're discussing today is extremely significant for today's environmental, political challenges that our society is facing. And I will start with a political statement. I think material recirculation is good, and I would really like to make a case for waste prevention. So I brought my own plastic water with me that I can refill. So I also think that it's very important that we, all of us, meet here today, because it's a privileged opportunity for discussing together these questions. These are spaces for dialogue that are tremendously valuable for the scientific work and for its dissemination through society. So the structure that I'm proposing here to discuss Isabel's work is basically following your thesis outline, not to make things too much more complicated. And I will start with different questions about the aim and the research questions, following by the methodology, and then I will go through the findings in topic 1, 2, and 3, and finally how you answer the aim of your research. That's okay. And, well, I had a first question, and I have just to take it out, because I was wondering what was a designer like you doing with waste, so you have already answered that question.
I'm happy I did.
So, I will start with this figure 8, topic overview, with the topics 1 and 2 zooming on specific cases of material recirculation, and the topic 3 providing a broader context for recirculation. In this second chapter, you explain the approaches, the aim, and study of your study overview. And this figure 8 provides an overview of these topics. But this is a figure that you create a posteriori.
Yes.
To try to make sense of your work afterwards.
Yeah.
And one thing I would like to do here is to open up some of the black boxes that we have left. And one of them is generally the research process, which often is much more abductive than deductive or inductive. So my question here is, could you speak a little bit about the chronology of your research project, and what was the original question? And I mean, you don't need to be so exhaustive, but was it topic 1, the first one, or was the third one? And did the literature review in topic 2 came before or after doing your intervention? Just to try to open a little bit more the black box of the research practice.
Yeah, that's a great question, especially because when you start off doing a PhD, you don't really know what you're signing up for. So we started out, basically my original topic was resource recovery from waste. That's what I wanted to do. And when I started working, the topic for the PhD was urban axis. What would you want to do with an urban axis? And I said waste, which might seem a bit of a stretch, but that was what I felt was calling me. So the first study I did was actually the interview study in topic 3. So the semi-structured interview with people from waste management and designers that had worked with waste. So I was interested if there were collaborations and how were they working, because it was difficult to find them in the literature. And I figured the practitioners that would probably be involved in such collaborations should know about it. So I started off there, and that led me to meet people like Taina Flink and David Gilblom, that we ended up doing a project together, the Waste to Design project. And that all came out of the dialogues that we had in the first interview study. So then there was a funding opportunity, and we applied with a project idea, and that developed into that. So that was kind of the second study, the designing with waste. And when doing the designing with waste, we realized that waste sorting is crucial, and it has to be a precondition to be able to design with waste. And that's why we went into the waste sorting issues. I looked for collaborators, practitioners that worked with waste sorting, and it was quite difficult actually. A lot of people, it was a process where a lot of people didn't get back to me until Poseidon said, yes, we'd very happily take somebody on board to to investigate these topics that we actively work with.
But if I may interrupt, because it must be especially challenging when it comes to design research, that you also depend on interventions.
Yeah, but I guess design research is a bit open. It can also be very theoretical, that you don't have to have interventions. I particularly wanted to have interventions because my interest was, why is this not working in the practice? Or what is the practice around recirculation? So I wanted it to come from actual problems rather than what I could read about in the literature. And that process takes on, it forms the research in its own way, because you depend on somebody else saying yes, that you can investigate something. So that, in that sense, the research started out very exploratory, and then whoever I met that wanted to do something ended up kind of influencing how I worked.
So it was growing more organically in some way.
Very much organically, I would say. Yeah.
It was a very good result. Now, I would like to go through your aim and your research questions. I think, let me see. Here we have. The aim was to better understand the barriers for recirculation for the materials used in the production of consumer goods in order to propose ways to facilitate circular material use in society. And then you have 3 research questions that are for each of the 3 topics that you've been describing. What hinders product development from discarded materials? What are the barriers to improving waste sorting? And how does design currently relate to material recirculation? As I said, I think the research aim is significant and addresses some of the most important current societal challenges. It is well defined, in my opinion, and it is operationalized consistently with these 3 research questions that are simple and clearly formulated, but I think they are broad.
Very broad.
Why did you choose to have these broad questions, and what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of having these broad questions?
I think for me it was important to have a large systems view. So I wanted, and I think throughout the work I've gone from the very broad question of recirculating materials in society to specific, how can we sort waste in apartment buildings? And to be able to do that pendling between the big picture to the concrete details is, I think, what has helped me maintain the overall idea in the back of the head. It is a challenge because you end up saying, yeah, I'm looking into resource recovery from waste, and you could do anything, basically. You could work with several types of materials or several types of stakeholders. You could do a purely theoretical thesis as well. So it was difficult to define what it is that I was doing. And in many cases, when you're working in concrete specific cases with stakeholders, you also lose track of what it is that I'm bringing to the group, because the different stakeholders, in the case of Poseidon or the housing companies that we work with, or the waste management company, they were doing this and they're much better at it than I am. They know, they have much more experience. So what is it that I contribute? And that was difficult to have in mind all the time. You get lost in it a bit.
But what about the possible disadvantages as well? Would it have been better if you had focused instead in a more in-depth study in one of the 3 research questions? So if you have narrowed down your study to industrial waste or household waste, which is totally different, as you were acknowledging before, because of the kind of complexities that it involves.
I think that you might have gotten longer with that within that specific topic, but I think you would have lost the big picture, and you would have kind of forgotten the challenges that belonging to a larger system entails. And I think the main thing with material recirculation, it is basically trying to connect the whole of economy, you know, like the whole societal use of materials to something. And that is very broad and abstract, and you can't really pinpoint it down with one case. So the disadvantage is, yes, you don't get that far with anything that you do. You're kind of doing testing grounds in different things, but you don't really get that very deep into that. So it's a compromise, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a valid strategy. I think some others, probably from other disciplines, and anthropological studies have been focusing more at the node of the infrastructure, arguing that you can also understand the complexity of the whole system through the understanding at the micro level. But I totally agree that it's a valid strategy to do it. And it has challenges, but I think you work well with them. I also agree with your research design strategy in the sense that you adopt a multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary research, since you argue that it's necessary to tackle weak sustainability problems. Yeah. But it probably sounds easier than what it is. So what are the challenges of working between disciplines and with practitioners?
I think the main challenge is to find the people that you really connect with and that you can understand what you're talking about. When we come from very different disciplines, or when we're working in the industry or in government, you do things in different ways and you have different time frames, and so to be able to find the common grounds is difficult. And I think the only way to get around that is by trying to work together and trying to collaborate. I've been very lucky with the people that I've collaborated and worked with. I've just met a lot of people that you can talk for hours, and then suddenly we're, oh yes, you're also doing that, and blah, blah, blah. So when you get people that ignite with the topics that you're engaged in, then it's easy. It becomes an easy thing to do, I think.
Mm. And how do you do that? How do you create those common grounds?
I guess you wish for them. You try to look for the commonalities, of course, like everybody, or especially when you already have someone that is interested in a similar topic, then you just stick to the things that you both agree on rather than the differences, and work on the commonalities rather than pinpointing in how you're wrong or how I'm right, or what this different approaches might lead to. So kind of trying to be more proactive than
were those collaborations, did they take a long time? Were there long processes? Do you think time?
Yeah, some of them spanned several years, and some of them were shorter. Some of them were concrete collaborations over an article, or then it turned out to be several articles, or it was initially the collaboration with Poseidon, for instance. Initially it was one study, then it ended up being 3. So it varies, and I think you can't really define what you want out of it before, because then you've already planned too much and you don't let the others in to affect it.
Speaking about the vocabulary and the different concepts you used, I will not ask many questions, but I'm intrigued by one of them. Why using the term user and not consumer, as many others do nowadays in the literature?
Yeah, that was an active choice, actually, because, and a little bit has to do with who my research is oriented to. I'm interested in the doers, in the people that engage actively rather than just take on and consume passively. And I do believe that we all have both those roles, the active and the more passive. You can't be active with everything all the time, but it was the actionable part of people that I was interested in. That's why I always referred to people as users rather than consumers.
Not reducing them to consumers either.
And also, in a way, my thesis doesn't question the need for reducing consumption, assuming that the consumption, if the consumption that is done in a circular model, it will be better. But I do agree that consumption has to be questioned, and it cannot just continue to grow and be accepted as the way of moving the economy. So I kind of actively decided to move away from that concept.
Thank you. Then I would like to move to the methodology, and this is an action and design research with the intention to facilitate material recirculation, and it's conducted through mixed methods. You use, it's very challenging, you use a combination of interviews, surveys, field observations, product studies. Let me start with the interviews. You used semi-structured interviews in several cases with the students in topic 1, am I right? And with designers and waste management professionals in the topic 3.
also in topic 2, but I don't talk that much about it, but yes.
No. And did you transcribe your the interviews, or how did you deal with the data?
Yes and no. I'm in that sense, I guess I'm not that unorthodox, such of an orthodox person. I don't think you have to transcribe the entire thing. I think you have to transcribe the parts that really hold a response that you need. So yes, I did go through all the material that I had recorded and transcribe the parts of it that were most relevant to me.
What could you have missed from those summaries?
I mean, I do think you miss a lot of things constantly, and even with having just transcribed the responses that I thought were more relevant, when you write an article, you don't use all of them either. So you are constantly filtering out things, and you might be missing a lot of important bits. But I was never intending to do a language analysis or how often a certain concept came up in the interviews. I never had that as a methodology that I thought was going to be relevant. So that's why I chose not to do the thorough transcribing.
How could you know when you were transcribing those interviews that part was important and another part was not? You cannot know that now retrospectively, because now you only have that part of the interviews.
No, I think you filter that when you're doing the interview, or when you're listening again to the interview. You filter out there what feels more of a result, or then sometimes when you're talking with someone and they go on a tangent, and you know they're going on a tangent, and if the tangent doesn't hit a really interesting pot, then it's just a tangent. So I think as a researcher, you're constantly filtering out things, for good or for bad. But you do that at all the stages, I think.
But in my opinion, I think that might shape your results and constrain them.
But and in that sense, I do think the researcher always shapes the results in a way, because it is through the researcher's eyes that you're addressing these data. So epistemologically, I don't believe in a one objective reality. So yes, I'm okay with the fact that yes, I have shaped the research I've done.
Did you use interview guides?
Yes, I did.
But you didn't include them as an appendix, or?
No.
No.
They're available upon request if you're interested.
Perhaps it's not a tradition in your discipline, I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Okay. And how did you analyze the interviews?
Well, since I had a guide, I had questions that were more central, and some were more building up to have a profile of the interviewee or so on. And then I analyze these interviews by following the main questions throughout all the different interviewees and comparing them. And like then
more deductively from the categories that you already had established in the
Well, no, the questions I've established, and then the responses to those questions generate a data set of responses that then get categorized.
The categories emerge from the data.
Yeah, from the data.
That's nice, because I have not read that explanation in any of your papers, and it would be really nice to know a little bit better about how you explore and you analyze the data. We generally think we miss that part when we write articles. Often we give a lot of details about how we collect data, but too little about how we analyze it. And obviously we follow strategies like the one you're explaining for us now.
Yeah, I guess it seems natural that the categories have to come from the data. So I don't know, I probably missed describing that.
I think you made a good job. And the thing is that when one uses this triangulation strategy, I think one can become very overwhelmed, because we generate so much data, and I'm speaking about myself as a researcher. So we often under-analyze what we have collected.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think we have treasures in our data, and they become waste.
Yeah, it is absolutely true. I have way too much data that I haven't been able to go through.
Yeah, me too.
In all the studies, and even you've published, like the first interview study ended up being published in 4 different articles. And I still have data that I haven't analyzed on it. So it's overwhelming.
Yeah. So you think you can do some material recovery in your own research data?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Very good. Me too. Good. Let's go to field observations. You were conducting observations during students' meetings and supervision, for example,
Yeah.
was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you there? How did you register your observations?
Well, the easiest way of being there is by being one of the actors participating. So I was a supervisor for the students that did their thesis in the waste design project. And I wasn't there when they were getting supervisions from industry or material experts. But I was there in all the academic supervisions. And what we did do was ask them about the other supervisions, and then they had to write weekly reports about what they have done last week. So if they would have a supervision with an industrial expert, then they would describe the results from that. That's how we got that information.
You write them down, registered your notes?
Students, yeah. And then when I was in the supervisions, I took notes of the process. And then we did an interview study with them in the end that we recorded the interview, but not every supervision. I think that would be a bit of an intrusive, I guess.
And then in topic 2, you were studying waste sorting in apartment houses, and you were doing fieldwork observations, but they were conducted by housing company staff, by the housing company staff?
No, not always. Sometimes I worked very closely with the housing company staff, but I was out in the waste rooms quite often as well.
How many observations you made yourself, more or less?
In the first study, we had 12 observations. I was there for 4 of them, and then we hired some students or other researchers to do the other ones, basically because I had to be in another place at the same time. So.
But you don't have the skill of the ubiquity yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet.
No.
But it's a good way to do multi-site ethnographies in that way, like using other people. This is why I thought, like, wow, this is an interesting method.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like using stuff, for example. It's a method you have read and is perhaps very common in waste management research. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think I read about it. I just realized I needed somebody else there.
You need to be in the different places.
It's also, when you're going to do a waste characterization study, you can't do it alone. It's too much materials, and it gets very lonely and boring. You need somebody to joke about the diapers that you're finding in the mixed waste. So it kind of, you need some moral support to go through it.
But then I found it original, and I thought that it could be interesting to develop. But was it difficult to provide instructions to those observers?
Yeah, well, it was to choose the people that were going to be doing the observations and to give them the procedures that had to be followed. The only way I found to do it was to do it with them once. So then all the questions would come up then, and then you could rely on the fact that they knew what to do after. So that was the way we did it. But I did have problems with choosing somebody that then was unreliable and didn't collect data when we needed it, and then so then you end up having holes in the data that you didn't wish for. But it happens.
I think it's interesting method, perhaps interesting to develop in the future, in future studies. You also decided to conduct a user survey in topic 2 when studying waste sorting in apartments. Why a survey?
Basically because of the amount of people that lived in the apartments where we were doing the studies. We couldn't have interviewed everybody. It was completely out of the scale of time we had.
But you ended up only with 19 replies.
In the first one, it was only 19 that replied, but there was a total of 92 flats. If I would have known it was only 19 that were going to reply, we might have interviewed them. But no, we were expecting for having much more answers. Unfortunately, we didn't, so we have to complement it.
But why not a survey and interviews, in-depth interviews?
Well, we did some interviews, and when we did these studies, we started off with an information campaign, so a door-to-door campaign that the municipal office supports and housing companies do regularly. So you have people knocking doors in the evenings and telling people that we were going to do a study and informing them about that. And there, a lot of people just love to talk about waste, surprisingly enough. people love to talk about trash.
They do.
It's a very, very frequent party topic when I say what I do. So there we interviewed, or not structurally interviewed a lot of people, but we ended up having a lot of interview material from the DOOR campaign.
Did you write down those?
Yes.
And that's part of the analysis as well that you present in the article?
No.
Okay.
No, that did not make it in the data that made it to the article, but it's data I still have.
Absolutely.
To be mined.
Yeah, exactly. But is that perhaps even more interesting, those details that you got from those informal conversations, than sometimes the information you get from this
surveys?
Structured survey?
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I think some surveys, sometimes, especially when you leave space for people to write comments on surveys, you get a lot of interesting things as well that maybe people wouldn't dare to say to your face even. So, like, yeah. And in that sense, because when you're doing a door-to-door campaign saying that we're going to do some tests about waste sorting, they're not going to tell you, like, I'm completely uninterested, this is rubbish, you should not waste your time. But that might come in a survey. So, yeah.
And if we look into the article, I think it was article D, probably article D, when you write about the intervention.
Yeah.
And how useful were the statistics produced by those closed questions that you had in the survey compared to the open comments that you got?
I would say they weren't that useful. That survey had a very low response rate. It was only 19 responses, around 20% of the total people asked. And the problem was that you already know that it's a biased group because they're the ones that want to sort and they find it relevant. And so you already know that it's only that opinion that you're getting. And since it was such a low response rate, we had to complement it with a survey in another building that had a similar system. So you could say the general attitude from tenants of this housing company towards sorting of different fractions, and that got used in the article. But it wasn't. I don't think it made it up to like the main findings or the things that you actually were surprised about.
Because when I read the text in your article, things that were very interesting seems to come from those open comments, like that it was annoying to retrieve the key from the housing company for bulky waste, for example.
But that came in a survey.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one of the open comments.
Open comments, yes,
that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
That perhaps the statistics about self-reported behavior were not so interesting or so reliable. However, that information seemed to give you some guidelines for doing
and they're
other
not
things.
That surprising either, I think.
No.
Especially when you're asking something that's been kind of, they know they're expected to sort, so it's kind of predictable in a way.
Yeah. In your last paper, you conducted a web survey.
Yes.
And I think that was very positive, very interesting to use all social media, professional networks like LinkedIn groups to understand the challenges that the profession is facing. So what have you learned from that experience? Using that method, will you use it again? What would you change?
Definitely. I would definitely use it again. I think I would try to diversify the channels I use to send it out. I ended up getting a lot of design researchers because I spread it through a design research newsletter as well. So, but I think the most surprising thing of that is that there's so many people that do not use end-of-life considerations when they do product development, despite that they're interested enough in the topic to answer a web survey.
Yeah.
So
that was very surprising.
Yeah, I think that was a bit of a shocker. I guess since I've been reading sustainable design so long, I kind of expected everybody to do this, or everybody be aware of it. I think everybody is aware of it, at least, but in practice, it ends up getting lost among other things.
A technical question: how do we activate this?
I think you
just do this. I don't want to personally wrong bottom here.
No. It's
and then
here,
everything's going to crash.
Ta-da!
That's lovely. Thank you. You're a very polyfunctional woman. Good communicator, also good with technician. So I will move now to, I'm happy with the methodology now, with all these questions. I'm satisfied. I will move to chapter 3. We will start discussing your findings. In topic 1 is design with waste.
Yeah.
Your research question was what hinders product development from discarded materials, and you explored this question through the Waste to Design project, where design students write their thesis to developing products using this industrial waste provided by the recycling company. And then later you compared the results with a similar initiative in India, as you were explaining for us before, and you have 2 papers here. So, you were saying a little bit about what I want to hear in your presentation, but in what way is designing with waste different from designing from other materials?
It's much harder. The material is irregular, and I think beyond the material irregularity, the main problem is that you don't really know what you want to do. And it's like when you're designing without a challenge or a task, when you're just out of design school, where you've always been proposed with different challenges and tasks, it's like, okay, I'm gonna do some exciting design. What should I do? You know, like, where do you start? And what product should I tackle? It's very difficult to choose something with an open sky of possibility. So I think that is quite of a challenge. And we had suggested using product taxonomies to see different products that might be useful with this material, but it's much easier to try to solve a problem or a challenge because you already have something there you want to work with. Rather than, yeah, well, life is great. What should I make? You know, it's kind of different.
So somehow, with regard to these issues of material indefinition and uncertainty that you're mentioning, something that has intrigued me from your work is the latent but recurrent discussion about what waste is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I found different definitions of waste in your own work, and it seems like you had a starting definition of what waste is, and then a change that has evolved and has developed during your research. So, what was that?
Waste?
What is waste? Is there anything called waste? There is some ontology?
I would say it's just materials that are misplaced. So it's just things that are in a place where they shouldn't be at a time that they shouldn't be. Like any materials, if categorized correctly or put in a right context, then it's not waste anymore. And I think a lot of the zero waste literature also tackles this. Yeah, but there is no waste. We should only talk about resources. And I agree. But it's easier for me to say waste is what's being discarded, and we're going to address that so we all know what we're talking about. Because if I always talk about resources, then it's very unclear which resources I'm talking about. So even though I agree we should move away from the concept of waste and that there is no such thing as waste, it is a useful term to use to make it clear that I'm looking at the materials that somebody has thrown away.
Yeah. And I think this is very interesting because you arrived to similar conclusions that a British anthropologist called Mary Douglas, I don't know if that sound any bell. She wrote a seminal book in the 60s called Purity and Danger. I think I have a quotation here, which is always referred to as a classic in social sciences when in studies of pollution, waste, and cleanliness. And she reflects here, I have some definitions that come from her book, about dirt as an essential, if you have the definitions here, you can read them there.
Yeah,
essentially disorder. There is no such a thing as absolute dirt when let's just read waste. It exists in the eye of the beholder. Dirt is matter out of place and the byproduct of a systematic ordering and classification of matter, insofar as ordering involves rejecting inappropriate elements.
Yeah.
Then Mary Douglas continues saying something that I think is very relevant for designers working with waste, which is reordering our environment, making it conform to an idea, is a creative moment, an attempt to relate form to function, to make unity of experience. Yeah. So how do your findings resonate with Mary Douglas' reflections about waste?
I completely agree, and the fact is that in a way, recovering resources is working against entropy. It's kind of like you're trying to put the Lego pieces back into their own boxes to be able to use them again, or something in that sense. So I do definitely agree that it's just disorder that you have to address and relocate. And in the findings, it is, I mean, all the materials that we went through in the waste characterization studies, after we did review the material, we discarded it where it should have been discarded, so it ended up not being wasted. But there is this additional time and effort that is a big hinder for it actually getting ordered. So I completely agree, and I do think that we should be able to design a system where the default will end up being reordered rather than just discarded or incinerated.
I agree. And cleaning dirt, managing waste seems to be a creative moment.
Yeah,
it is a design moment, probably.
Yeah, definitely, because you're categorizing what is it that it is, and you're getting rid of what it is that is not. I read also someone saying, it's a quote that haunted me, because I really like this more philosophical discussion about what is value and what is waste, and I could talk about it for hours, but there was one quote, I don't remember which article, it said, every act of throwing away is like a little death. You're exercising the riddance of existence, of getting rid of something, and you're exercising this death. Maybe. I don't think I think about it like that when I'm cleaning the trash out of the toilet, but it is an interesting perspective on it. I definitely think it's interesting to see. I don't see how useful it is for me to design a system to have this reflection of discarding being a death in an everyday scenario.
I don't see it either.
Yeah.
But continuing with the discussion about the materiality of waste, why was experiencing the discarded materials especially important in designing out of waste?
I think because discarding is a creative process as well, as you were saying. I think to experience the material firsthand will trigger creativity to be able to bring it somewhere else. It's very difficult, and I think one of the main challenges for designers to realize the challenges of waste management is the difference in volume. When people say, yeah, every person in Gothenburg throws out like 460 or 480 kilos of waste a year, you don't really see the tons that implies. You don't really, until you go to a recycling center and stand upon a pile of paper or metal or whatever it is, you don't understand the volumes. So it's very important to have that connection to the material and to the scale. That is very difficult to grasp if you're not in the branch.
I agree. This is why I have prepared all these pictures here. There are some citizen-driven initiatives that deal with this overflow of discarded objects in our society. You know very well some of them. I have pictures here of the bike kitchen, for example. Citizen-driven initiatives like Chalmers Students for Sustainability, organizing food rescue parties or recycle days. All these citizens are very aware, are in contact with this overflow of discarded objects, and they see that overflow, and they also see you learn, for example, in the bake kitchen what an easy fix is, because you are experiencing that materiality. Yeah. Also with these social entrepreneurs. And that's exactly the point you were making when it comes to, I think I have another picture here, people working within the infrastructure. They know how much we waste every day. Oh, yeah. This is just pictures of an outraged person working for Renova showing me how much food we just waste it every day, right? And these people we have been interviewing a couple of weeks ago in a landfill in Nicaragua, designing things from waste, like Javier, for example. So the question is, because these people are there, they can see, they can experience waste, they can imagine the value to be, the potential affordances and functionalities. Here comes the question. How would it be possible for designers to learn to take advantage from the knowledge that formal and informal waste management professionals and even users develop due to their close contact with waste? Or should we move design directly to that people?
I think the main thing, and not only for designers, but for everybody, when we were doing the waste characterization study, I thought, you know, doing a waste characterization study and going through other people's waste should be mandatory in high school. You know, you have, it is
I agree.
It is really a life experience, and it has. I remember one of the first days I was sitting in the tram going home, and you have this emptiness inside, where you really feel this is very human. This is only us. This is human activity, and you don't get that by talking about it or by showing people pictures of it. You get it when you're there, and when you open the bags and you see, but this is could be used for something else, etc. So I definitely think that we should be more exposed to the waste that we have. And an interview, one of the interviews with a waste management professional, they said we might have made the waste system too good because you don't see it. And it is true in the extent that the things are very easily taken away and out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. So, and we've done that in the environmental course with Jonas. We had a workshop where we asked the students to bring a bag from the waste sorting room in their apartment building that wasn't their own, that they would have to open in the classroom to do the characterization study there and to see how all these products, and the point of that activity was to tell them all these products were designed to be tossed away. Because if you didn't manage for it to get recycled, all the things that are here, the designer failed, basically. And I think we should dig into the trash much more than we do. Absolutely.
Designers first.
Yeah.
Then in paper B, Designing with Waste, the comparison of two practice-based education cases, I think that's an excellent research opportunity when we collaborate with other cases, because we can contextualize our results and methodologically allow us to make comparisons in a way that is very pragmatic. It's a privileged situation where we have others that can really make interpretations of how things are in India, which we cannot. It would be too expensive, it would take a whole life. What did you learn from your waste to design case with this comparison that you would have not learned otherwise?
I think I had, ignored the importance of actually having the material available and sorted, and that was a crucial step. And when you realize that the students in India had much less time because it wasn't a thesis, it was only in a course, so they had 7 weeks to do this, and they spent the whole first week going to the landfill, it does definitely put a lot of more demands on the designer. And I think I wouldn't have realized how crucial that was, and how much harder it is to look into mixed household waste, or in that sense, all city waste rather than industrial waste.
That was very interesting. Let's move to topic 2, not to get too tired with topic 1, waste sorting. And within this topic, you investigate what are the barriers to improving waste sorting, and you delimit your study to the household waste management in apartment blocks here in Gothenburg. Yeah. And you have published 2 articles, a literature review and this intervention case.
It's been submitted.
Submitted.
It's not published.
Well, sorry,
review.
yes, you have written, sorry.
I shouldn't have said that, maybe, but
yeah, sorry, reformulated. Let's start with your literature review, because I think that's you make a relevant literature review of social and technical aspects affecting recycling behavior of household waste. That was important.
Glad you think so.
Yeah. Which comes to covering a gap in the literature. I have some questions about the methodology you use anyway. For example, what key phrases did you use to make your research? The
search we did, we had chosen that we were going to do 2 topics, and one was sorting behavior, or recycling behavior, and the other one was improving the sorting system, or the waste sorting system. So to get the technical aspects or the infrastructural aspect, and then also the behavioral aspects involved. So we use different search phrases for these two topics. It was research behavior, or research sorting behavior, or recycling behavior, and the other was, I believe, sustainable waste management or waste sorting.
But why didn't you include other concepts to understand the social dimension of recycling? You only used behavior.
Yeah, I don't know. Source sorting was also one of the. Well, the thing is, as soon as you put one of these search phrases in, you get more articles than you can read in a lifetime. So you have to start filtering out. And if you're going to look into all the concepts, it just gets harder and harder. Right? We could have looked at it with other keywords, for sure.
What other keywords could have been interesting for the social side?
It could have been practices or
yeah, I think so.
or activities. Or,
probably, because one of the consequences of excluding other concepts is that you found out that there were only 5 or 6 articles that were using qualitative research. Right, so that's one of the ways. And I think probably I would just like to make a point that by only focusing on the concept of behavior, the vast majority of more qualitative research on waste practices coming from material culture studies, consumption studies, sociology is excluded from the literature. And then the thing is that the concept of behavior is connected to a social psychology school where rational decision-making processes are central, and then survey methods are also common. But waste management is also routine-based, and it's contextual, and it's more than a rational and a consistent translation of just attitudes into behavior and change. So this ABC model is not, it's quite okay, but there are many other schools.
I totally agree. I do think, I just think you get a bit overwhelmed when you try to do a literature study.
Absolutely.
And it's hard to be able to identify and know all the different research schools if you don't really have someone to say like
Absolutely.
Like this.
And I can also take the responsibility that from the social sciences, we have neglected the study of infrastructures for a long time. Still, in the last decades, we have experienced what we call the infrastructure turn, the material turn, the practice turn. So there is some kind of growing literature about waste, and again, as we were discussing during the lunch, we need to find the time to meet each other properly.
Exactly.
Then you conclude in the same article that in the literature that you review, there is an agreement that factors affecting recycling behavior are appropriate physical infrastructure, shorter distance, reliable service, user convenience, and adequate information. That's good. Myself, I'm going to use this for my research. Thank you. Yet, when it comes to what you call sociodemographics, the findings from the different studies contradict each other. And it's hard to make generalizations. Like, it's not clear if positive environmental attitudes improve or not recycling practices, either if more education or income does it or not. So that what can be concluded from this lack of agreement in the literature about the social aspects of wasting practices?
I think basically there is a lot of, there is way too many factors influencing. And when you say, when one researcher says the level of education, they measure it in some way. So they measure it in how many years did the people in the household go to school, or etc. And then another study will measure it in a different way. I'm not sure, but or they'll mix it up with another demographic factor, as in how many people are in the household. So the comparisons get very difficult because they're measuring these elaborated factors in different ways. So the comparison is not direct. And on the other hand, in one area you may have the fact that, for instance, elderly people sort better because they have more time. That has been one argument in a article. But then another article says, the elderly people sort worse because they are not interested or have health problems. So it depends on the people, I would say, and it's very context dependent. And you cannot ignore the fact that the demographics will influence waste generation and sorting behavior, but that it cannot be extrapolated beyond the context where you're measuring it and exactly that you're measuring it. So it just makes it much harder to be able to plan.
I agree. The complexity of humans requires contextual understandings.
Yeah, and I even question, I mean, it's interesting to try to generalize and group with demographic factors and have some understanding, but that serves us to be able to understand or to try to understand how people's life cycle stages are or different things like this. But it doesn't really describe the people. And the same people may react in different ways depending on if there was a party or if they were on vacation or etc. So people are unpredictable, and I think that's a good thing, and that we should be happy that people can change. Yeah, so that's why I find demographics.
It's part of the complexity of human nature, and then probably we should be more contextual, as you're saying, in our understanding. Yeah. Like just to black box the user in one figure and simplify doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Agree. So we move to Article D, where you focus on the interventions in the apartment housing block, and you come up with a very interesting conclusion that you presented in your summary, that the discrepancy between how users naturally categorize the refuse and the categories available in the containers generates wrong sorting. In other words, that the waste management logic of disassembling is imposed to the layman logic. Since users do not distinguish between, okay, this is just paper, I put it with the other newspapers, of course. So, what to do about it? What can design do about it?
I think the waste management system has been very, very much developed from how it's being solved, the technical aspects, how we're taking care of it. And a lot of the administrative decisions of who pays for what, for instance, like the packaging and paper collection system is a certain type of companies that pay for that, and then that's why we only collect packaging in these household clothes rooms. But this is all administrative explanations that go beyond the point that I have an envelope or I have a paper receipt that I want to throw away, but it's not a packaging. It'll go into the paper packaging anyway. So that fact of that the administrative decisions that are how the system is financed is more central to how the fifth system is designed, rather than the system being designed for the people that are using it, and then we figure out how to finance it and administrate it kind of backstage in a way, but that the thing that you meet is designed with the user's need in mind rather than a result of the administrative structures.
So we should change the system to match users' perceptions instead.
I totally agree for that.
And a very relevant finding coming also from the composition study was that the users usually dispose of clothes in a bag or grouped. That I found it very interesting. Yeah. Why do users do that?
I think when we found that, whenever we found textiles, they were in a separate bag. And reflecting on how you sort waste at home or when you sort out the clothes, you have your clothes in your closet, and when you're going to clean out your closet, you get rid of the clothes and you put that in a bag that's separate from the trash bin in the toilet or the one in the kitchen. It's a bag of its own. So the textiles are already separate from everything else, and you come to a room where there is no textile sorting, so it goes into the mixed bag. But that observation made Poseidon, together with Renova, do a project where they tested offering the possibility to sort textiles in apartment buildings, and they tested it in 30 flats, and in the first month they got 2 tons of material. So that is a category that the user has that the system is not addressing because it's not part of the administrative infrastructure behind it.
No, I think that was a very great intervention and a result of an observation, that this layman logic of distinguishing between these materials. I would also say, because it came up to my mind, Mary Douglas again, she is this British anthropologist, she would say that mixing clothes with mixed waste would be a micro taboo. Like she says, like serving tea in a chipped porcelain. It simply feels wrong to do this.
It does. And especially because I just guess when, like, it's the stuff that you're putting on you. It's the stuff you're putting on your body. You're not mixing it with the stuff that you've been peeling off the bananas. It's not, you don't want to have it together.
This is what then I found, like, how could we identify those micro taboos and creating rituals around them to channel them to the right conduits, right? So that's where I thought it was extremely positive that you could find that way with the intervention in the housing company. You also concluded that having a different room for electronic waste would decrease the chances to sort out correctly.
Yeah.
I do suggested to the company that they would do it, but they didn't. It was a good recommendation that the waste management system would adapt to the user and not the other way around if we want to be efficient. But do you think we can treat all these categories as uniform, homogeneous? I'm talking about electronic waste, because it's very different. A small battery, portable battery, compared to something that is slightly bigger.
I think we have to treat the different fractions in different ways because they're going to be treated in different ways as well. But we also address them in different ways in the household. And I think in the case of electronic waste, or the housing company and the waste management company do offer like collection of small batteries and lamps in these waste sorting rooms already, but not for larger electronics. And we just saw so many big coffee makers or things tossed into the mixed waste that you imagine that just having access, easy access, because they do have access to a special room that they would have to get the key for. So since that access is harder than the mixed waste, then the mixed waste wins. And I do think that has to be changed.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's important to contextualize and nuance our understanding of the recycling practices. Yeah. Like perhaps at home batteries, it's someone else who is taking care of them for recycling. And it's often something that you could do, an activity that is co-performed with other activities, like you might bring your small batteries when they're used to work because you know that there is a place where you can recycle. They can be totally different worlds.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think, for instance, waste of medicine, the medicines we take that they've expired, and then those end up in the mixed waste most likely, even though they should be treated separately. And what are the routines around that? That's also a completely different compartment at home. You know, you don't mix your medicines with your trash. So it's other aspects that should definitely be considered.
You were mentioning before the household as well, and you were also, I think it's in this article, redefining what waste management is as much more than simply the waste management infrastructure, like the waste room, the waste vacuum system, or even the staff that is working for the waste management. It is also information that is provided. It is also economic incentives, and it's also part of the infrastructure that is within the home, the bin. It's something like the capillaries of the infrastructure that enter the household, the home. Yeah. However, you don't integrate any household study to understand better the wasting behavior and how that part of the infrastructure affects our practices. Why not? What could you have missed from that?
I think I missed a lot with that, but basically because of time limitations, I would say, because there were so many projects that we had running that going into deep interviews into households was a step further down the rabbit hole, I would say. So I think they're very valuable, and I do think there is a lot of research around them in the practices research base. They do have the ethnographic studies around waste behavior is also very relevant there. So there is a lot there that should be.
No, especially if you want to have a holistic understanding of the whole system. It's like we are not penetrating totally. No. To the people, because there's an author I like also, it's an urbanist, Abdulmalik Simone, says that people is the infrastructure.
Yeah. I totally agree. And the thing is, I guess, even without permeating that most intimate level of the waste management system, where people make their own decisions, you still are offering what is connecting there. And already just by looking at what you're offering, you see that there's so many things that you can improve already, that it felt like this is a low-hanging fruit. We can start here and then with time get further in, I think. It's gonna get started.
Yeah, thank you. So it's good to move a little bit in between.
Yep. Now it should be active. There we go.
Yeah, there we are. I think it's here.
Yes.
The reuse room. Since yesterday you were attending one of these activities organized by the Kretsloppsokvatten, the waste management department from the municipality of Gothenburg. That it's
waste and water. Sustainable waste and water office.
Thank you very much. And they are organizing some studies with different students to design some prototypes for what it could be, how do you call it in English, upcycling rooms or reusing rooms in different parts of the city. And actually you mentioned one of them in your article, and I think it's important, speaking about the higher steps of the waste hierarchy in reusing and trying to reduce the amount of waste. So reuse rooms is one example. And you conclude that this reusing room, it might not have a large effect on the waste volume generating in that area, given that it is open, in this case it was once a week, but it is a way of motivating tenants to try to recirculate items that are in good conditions. So what is the value of this pilot and innovative projects from a material recirculation perspective?
I think as this event that we were at yesterday, the city needs space for exchange, for instead of throwing away other people taking, and you can leave stuff so they're swapped by other people, or even spaces for repairing, like the bike kitchen or different workshops that you would want to dedicate some hours to fix your own things instead of throwing them away. And I think the cities nowadays are lacking those spaces because they should be public, open spaces that do not necessarily have a consumer ideal behind it, but rather time sharing, effort sharing, kind of this folkbildning, this people teaching people to do things, or just getting together to do things together, like common kitchens and that sort of thing. And I think we've lost a lot of these communal spaces that we might have had before in certain countries, and we should definitely regain them. And in this case, it did not have a big effect. Like, it's very difficult to see effects on the waste statistics because the waste statistics vary so much already without having an intervention or without having a difference. So the effects these sort of things have are lost in the natural variations of the data. So it's very difficult to see.
Is only a symbolic value that these pilot projects have?
Well, I think when it's done at a small scale and it doesn't move that much material, it is. So in this case, I don't know the throughput of this reuse room in particular, but I imagine that as long as they're not throughputting several tons a month, they're not really having an effect because that's what we're throwing away. So it's not necessarily just symbolic. I do think it has an effect, but it has an effect at a more structural level, like it affects how people see things.
Yeah.
And I think
it's cultural change.
Yeah, it is. It is more of a cultural change than a measurable change.
And perhaps the cultural change is leading some more normative changes, like hopefully in the future we will not have any more waste rooms and we will only have reuse rooms.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if eventually if they reach mainstream institutions, as it was the case with these examples that came from housing companies, then the municipality 1.5 years ago did what they call a reuse room safari. So they were walking around the city, different waste management officers, and they were visiting these initiatives that came from the bottom up. And then they put them together in this brochure, and then they have used this brochure to inform other housing companies. Yeah. And now they are having this project, so still it seems to be, hopefully, in the process to change cultural institutions and more normative institutions.
Yeah. I think so. I have the impression that it's very mature time for this sort of change. Everybody kind of wants it.
Hopefully we are in that transition moment.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to move to topic 3 because time goes very quickly when one has fun.
Yeah.
Well, I'm having fun. I hope you do too. Yeah. And it's topic 3 is waste and design, and it investigates in what ways does design currently relate to waste, using an in-depth case study with the interviews with waste managers and designers, a product study, and then the web survey generally to other designers. Let me see, I think, yes, one of your conclusions of your results coming from your article E is this figure where in this article you study the collaboration between design and waste management.
Yeah.
And the results somehow, some of them are represented here.
Yeah.
It summarizes the areas of collaboration between design and waste management through design for durability, end of life, waste as input material, packaging for improved recyclability, and waste system interface. Okay, let me rotate your figure and put behind the waste hierarchy, the European waste hierarchy. Does it make sense to make a comparison here? I know you have to turn your head as well, but can you draw some conclusions?
I would say yes and no, because, and I do see definitely a connection between more design-centered to waste management-centered. It would be more prevention and then handling. But the last category, the one that I had problems fitting in, the waste system interface, that doesn't fit here. Necessarily, because that could be up until prevention. Yeah. If we say that these reuse rooms that we were just talking about are part of the waste system infrastructure, then they would be addressing prevention. So that category should not be that far down. And it in a way, it has a different abstraction level. I don't know. It kind of it belongs somewhere else.
My point is to reflect about the role that designers have in the upper part of the waste hierarchy, because I know that one of your suggestions is that designers should move down and look into help in waste management, but I think we especially need help to scale up this ladder.
Yeah, yes and no again. I think one of the things that we've been talking a lot with Oscar is that the problem that designers see themselves, and everybody kind of thinks of design and production as the beginning. If it's a circular, there is no beginning. So you have to be able to be in all the parts of the flow, and I think that the danger with only thinking about prevention is that you fail to address the things that are already discarded, and that you have to be able to try to recirculate again.
Okay, that's a good explanation. I would like to talk about another, we'll probably come back to the role of designers later, but I would like to speak about another black box, totally different. Informal waste pickers, informal waste management, because this is a theme that is mentioned precisely in this article, and it was only mentioned by those designers and waste managers that are working in non-European countries. Yeah. But informal waste pickers is also one of those black boxes. We cannot treat them homogeneously. It's a very heterogeneous group that includes from homeless scavengers to more systematic waste picking taking place in family-based recycling activities using the home, informal middlemen, and so on. And the thing is that in the absence of proper formal waste management services, millions of waste entrepreneurs provide these services around the world. And there, I was quoting here, I have an article, Da Silva Carvalho et al. In 2012, published in Waste Management and Research. They showed how waste pickers contributed twice as much to recovering materials in Rio de Janeiro than the formal waste management. Yeah. Yeah. And we have similar examples from El Cairo and so on. In Europe, I read that there are attempts to establish the European Waste Picker Association. So in your interviews with designers and waste management officers, your non-European interviews mentioned the informal recycling sector, but just because of the social aspect that, that is generating employment between the poor.
One of the informers was actually from Cairo and had been involved in the community, I think it's Coptic Catholics in Cairo, that had been the informal waste treatment there. And he didn't talk about it like of the social aspects. It was like, no, we achieve an 85–90% recycling, and they achieve much higher numbers. There are, of course, problems of hygiene and etc. But if you say these are people that are putting time and effort into it, if you can just help them to have a sanitary environment where they can and dignified work place, then this would be much better. I mean, and I think one of the great things about sustainable waste management requiring more effort and being very work intensive is that we have a lot of people that want to work as long as we can provide dignified working conditions.
Absolutely.
There's really good examples in India, actually. We were in contact with the municipality of Pune, and they had started a program where they incorporated the informal waste pickers as the collecting agents. So they would do door-to-door collection, where they would even be able to control the materials that were being sorted there, and they would directly sort there the ones that they knew that they could sell, making it a lot cleaner for them, and then also recirculating much more, and they earn more money because they were getting paid per collection as well.
Yeah, it's much more personalized service, less intermediaries.
Yeah, and there are locations that have, like, logistic-wise, the infrastructure does not allow for a big truck to come through the streets to go. And it doesn't have to be even like in slum areas. In cities like Valparaiso in Chile, to get a waste truck up in the hills in between, it doesn't work. So you need to have smaller entrepreneurs that do that extra step.
But the reality is that those professionals that you interviewed, they didn't acknowledge the role that these informal waste pickers have.
I would say
I didn't read that section.
Not all of them.
What does it say? That's what was my question. What interpretations can you make of those perceptions raised by these designers?
I think it's
the lack of acknowledgement.
Yeah, I think it's a problem that we have with the categorizations. I was saying with the demographics. When you try to classify everything in one thing, when you say informal waste pickers, you're thinking about the poor, starving child that is, going through a landfill filled with seagulls and etc. And it doesn't have to be like that. And I think just because we are not exposed to it as much, you end up saying that. I sometimes in lectures use, when we talk about informal waste pickers, I use pictures from Copenhagen, from people getting recycling bottles out of the trash. That's also informal waste picking.
Yeah. I showed one picture of that too in Gothenburg.
And in a way, it's this thing that you think that is far away. You think it's somebody else's problem and it's somebody else's reality. Whereas if you do dumpster diving here, that's also informal waste.
But but it seems like our professionals are denying the informal practices that are around. How does it affect?
Well, I guess you're less exposed to it. If you're a professional in the established waste management system, you're less exposed to the informal side. And you don't have to go dumpster diving because you get all the truckloads of tons of waste delivered to your door. So I guess you're detached from that reality.
Yeah. But and now it came up to my mind an example that a colleague of us has from Kisumu in Kenya. And he was looking, it's an engineer that we're working with in different projects, and he was reading all the documents for the waste management policy in Kisumu, and he didn't. The document doesn't mention at all cartment, and it's the way that waste is collected. So it's not only here, but in other places, we just deny that reality. But we deny how things are done.
Yeah, but there are good examples where that reality is acknowledged and incorporated, and I think maybe it's not the majority. But I think that's the way to go, to see the assets of it. And the problem, for instance, the waste management system in Cairo, from working very well, ended up being stopped and going up for international entrepreneurs to take care of the waste system that they were absolutely not familiar with. And it made it much harder. And the fact of trying to, from a top-down perspective, just decide what's going to happen without acknowledging what's actually happening on the ground ends up giving you partial results only.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
Let's move to this figure 20. I really enjoyed this figure. You elaborated to explain what resource recovery routes are currently used for recirculating discards. It's interesting effort to synthesize the complexity of the systems. I just would like to discuss a little bit the figure with you. I was intrigued. Why did you remove maintenance as a route?
Yes, because I thought in order to simplify, it was easier to address what stage of the life cycle of a product the materials were getting recirculated in. And if you maintain your bicycle, you can reuse, or you use it, and under use, you have it maintained. But you can also maintain somebody else's bicycle and get somebody else to use it. Or you could also get maintenance back at the factory, and they'll use it to make another type of bicycle or pick it apart more seriously. So I think it was a strategy that talks about ways of doing rather than where in the life cycle of a product it was going to be used. So and I do believe maintenance is very important, but I think maintenance will allow you to recirculate into reuse and into remanufacturing.
It's more like a strategy.
Exactly, and even to recycling. If you can maintain materials clean enough to be able to be a high-value recycling, it makes a difference. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I buy it.
Thank you.
Yeah, but can you identify, can we use also this figure to identify different locks in or bottlenecks that are hindering, how do you call it,
Well, I think,
material recirculation?
I think the main bottleneck that is available in this figure is the waste management, because what we focus on and what makes this figure different from other figures of material recirculation and like circular economy or the likes is that they have a more industry-centered approach where you go, okay, we provide serviceability, we provide repair, we provide remanufacturing and so on, but from an industry's perspective. And here we wanted to focus on the materials from the waste management system back into the different stages, but we're not showing the connections between the users directly to the industry, for instance. So it's not showing all the possibilities for recirculation.
No, but what about here?
Yeah, the incineration?
Yeah, it's an interlocked system here. Is there any possibility for locks in or
well, the availability of infrastructure provides certain lock-ins that we had been suggesting. Like when you have a lot of incinerator capacity, you want to have a lot of fuel to burn. So you might not be that keen on separating things. A waste manager in the interview we did actually said, like, I don't separate waste because I don't separate plastic waste because we need the energy, and you know, it's valuable in that sense as well. And I think that is a risk. It's great for reducing volumes and to be able to handle materials that are absolutely not recirculatable. But when it hinders the recirculation, then it's a problem. But I don't think, at least the waste management professionals that I've interviewed here in Sweden and in Germany, they were saying, well, if there's a lot of capacity, then there's a lot of capacity. I'd rather recycle than, you know. So they had a kind of a different view on that. And there is a risk there, and it is one of the problems that was mentioned in that article, the interview study.
Yeah, it's like one of your interviews said exactly like you mentioned before, that we have become too good. Yeah. The system has become too good. Yeah. Probably referred also to waste incineration. But is there also space here for innovation niches or innovation areas? Where could they be? Yeah,
I think the risk of the figure, or trying to simplify things into models like these, is yes, it facilitates understanding, but you end up forgetting that each one of these boxes is several thousands of actors. So waste management is not necessarily only the official waste management, but also the informal, as we were discussing, and users can be a very large array of types of users and so on. And I do think absolutely entrepreneurs have a role, and I do believe that entrepreneurs are going to be quicker on their feet than well-established industry. So within manufacturing, people with new thoughts and entrepreneurial green businesses, I think, will be quicker on to be able to close material loops than the established industry, because in a way they don't have anything to lose. They haven't earned it yet.
Yeah, hopefully. And last question about this figure: how could waste minimization be integrated in this model? Even if this is a representation for resource recovery routes, is there any place for dematerialization flows here?
Yeah, if you would want to visualize it in some way, I would say that all these gray arrows going into the waste system can be shrunk. So they could also be when I first started working with this model, I had kind of an illusion that the thickness of the arrows could represent the volumes, and then you realize that that's really difficult to do. Yeah. But I kind of had this vision that if you would visualize waste statistics in a way that you could actually have the thickness represent the volumes, you would understand the scale of the problem. And there are articles that have that at the global or local scales, but it doesn't allow for this much detail. Yeah,
I think we have squeezed this figure good enough. Let's move to chapter 6 then. And here you provide answers for the aim of your study. What currently hinders material circulation and how it can be facilitated. And you do it through the two models that you were presenting before. The first one summarizes the barriers, and the second one, the regulatory, cognitive, and normative changes that are necessary for more material recirculation. Again, I think very good synthesis. I could see in the pictures that you've been struggling with the tables. I like how you group the barriers into issues of complexity, material, information, time. Time, I think, is an important variable. Control, responsibilities. But so what do you have here? This is the themes, right? Complexity, material, lack of information, undefined responsibilities, lack of control, issues of time.
You don't know how tempted I was to just use that chart in the presentation instead of trying to decompose it. But it's completely undigestible like that. You can only get away with that in a scientific article, I would say.
It's still too complex. But then what I suggest is that we discuss the next figure, which is the 22 that you end up with. Somehow, I think in a way you have already answered to my question, but it's good to go through it. You made suggestions that would facilitate material recirculation. It's like 4 policy instruments and then incorporating the design profession into the waste management branch. How are the challenges identified in the previous table here addressed in these policy instruments?
That's a very good question.
Thank you.
I think some of them are covered, and I don't think all of them are covered. I think undefined responsibilities is not addressed by any of these suggestions, for instance. I think I had to, instead of starting from the barriers identified, I started from the suggestions in each of the topics. And that's what generated kind of the common themes in the suggestions rather than suggestions for the underlying barriers. Because since these are topics that are a bit more abstract, they're very difficult to operationalize into things that can be done. So I think starting from the suggestions within the topics made it easier to come with common suggestions. So I would say they're more related to the suggestions within each topic than they are to the barriers.
I understand. But for example, the redistribution of responsibilities, you have addressed it here, suggesting that designers should move a little bit further down in the waste hierarchy a little bit. But then I want to argue that I think that we are moving now in a new regulatory context with more and more European directives and national directives that are moving us into waste prevention, circular economy, and that requires new competencies, new knowledge. We're even seeing now in local governments, they are employing now for the waste management departments people that have a different background, that have a communication background, that know about environmental behavior. And so I think it's a window of opportunity open for professionals like designers as well. And we really need those competencies up in the waste hierarchy. What do you think? What could be concluded regarding this profession of design and the role in helping us moving up in the waste hierarchy?
Yeah, I think there is an important role in waste prevention, and that waste prevention does not only have to come from industry. They'll be very proactive about avoiding their own waste, but it's each user's own waste that has to be prevented as well. So I do think that everybody connecting more between these active agent and rather than the consuming agent that we talked about when you asked about why I use the word user. I think when we all realize that this is my problem as well as our problem and act upon that, it's easier to move up in the hierarchy into waste prevention. And designers have a role in doing that in industry, but I think, well, the cliche thing that we're all designers is very fitting in the sense that we are all the agents in this change that needs to be done. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
I don't think there is one only right answer.
No, for sure.
Unfortunately. Yeah. There is another aspect here that I found very interesting, is the transparency. Transparency about the materials used, but could we think about transparency to expand the issue of transparency? Are other things that need to be transparent?
Like the waste system. Yeah. Visualizing how much waste is going. Yeah. And I think one of my initial, exactly.
That was the point, yes.
One of my initial intentions when I started doing the PhD was doing some sort of data information visualization about waste statistics that is unfortunately still very cryptic, or very much into the infographics, this sort of thing. This is the yearly, for you, those of you who don't know.
Thank you.
This is the yearly volume of waste generated by the city of Gothenburg, piled up into the Ullevi Stadium.
And it's like opening up the 7S incinerator, opening up the infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. So to show how much of the materials are actually being incinerated and how much is going to landfill and how much. And these is data that is available. It's official data that is available. You could go online and find it. But as Hans Rosling very much said, the fact that the data sets are available doesn't mean that people get it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to take in this knowledge that we've been building up and measuring to actually inform your worldview. And that, I think, the waste branch has a lot of work to do still.
Absolutely. Yeah. Communicate this information. And you were saying something in the same line, like it should be compulsory to go to a landfill, to 7S, to understand, to couple our consumption behavior with the environmental footprint, which is exactly what they try to do with this composition.
And I think a little bit about making the waste system sexy, because a lot of designers that don't like to work with waste is because it's much more fun to think about, race cars or fancy electronic products rather than handling waste, which is not necessarily, it doesn't require rocket science, but it's not necessarily
to invert
appealing. But
the taboos connected to waste, change them.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Then, I think I'm going to go to chapter 7, to the final discussion. And here you say, your study is related to the field of eco-design and design for sustainability, circular economy, and a little bit transition studies. So how do your results confirm findings, previous findings, and what is your original contribution or your original contributions to these fields?
I think that to the sustainable design field, the main highlight was this surprise that in practice not that much designers are taking on all these strategies that are available. I think much more work has to be done in how to connect the theory of sustainable design to the practice. And I know there's tons of tools that are already available and can be discussed, but that the reality within the workplace in industry is not necessarily there. So I think that there is much more work that needs to be done there to actually integrate the solid theory that is available to get people doing it in that sense. Mm-hmm. And you said too, transition management, or
yep, transition studies.
I think I was kind of surprised to see that I completely agree with what they're proposing of how you have to start working in local hubs and get these niche groups to initiate things. So I was surprised that there was other theoretical background that was looking in the same direction, and to know that there exist these sort of recirculating hubs in the Netherlands, for instance. So that was great news, I think. The difference of what I've done to what they do is that I'm not looking at policy directly, I don't start from policy, but I realize that from the practice there are things in policy that make recirculation easier or harder to do. So it's a different starting point, I would say.
And what could other professions and organizations that are not designers learn from your thesis? That might be here in this room, right? What is in for us?
I think the zooming in and out into these complex questions and complex systems, and seeing how the bigger questions form and affect the micro decisions of implementation is a very useful and fruitful way of working, I find. And I think, of course, it generates much more questions than it does answers, but that just means that it's a way of researching that bubbles up. So it's very giving, I think. And then you're constantly reminded of how many more things should be done, rather than, oh, okay, we solved this. Now what do we do? I think that's useful. And I think that changing of perspective throughout the research is a takeaway, I would hope. Yeah.
And from all those new questions that you have brought up, what's next for you as a researcher? What would you like to do?
I would like to look into these recirculation hubs. I've been personally active in the bike kitchen, and I've seen how that sort of community and groups are being developed and supported by the city here in Gothenburg, and I think that that's definitely a way to go forward. But I would want to engage local manufacturers and producers to local waste management and material recirculator agents, and get that dialogue started. I think that's a fun project to take on.
It sounds like that. I wish you good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you for this discussion. I'm satisfied with all the questions, and we could proceed. Oscar, I think I'm happy, you know.
Gracias.
Okay, so now the word goes to the grading committee, who will be able to ask their questions and comments. And as tradition, the people who have made the longest journey here will go first. So that's Professor Tischner. I think you need to hold this mic closer to your mouth than you expect to.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Isabel. Great job. Thank you for your presentation and the decent piece of work that you gave to us in your thesis. I especially appreciated the illustrations. So I think it was very well illustrated, because you're a designer, so we can expect that from you. Thank you very much. Nevertheless, although Maria already did a very good job asking you all these critical questions, I still have a few more questions. One is a very fundamental one. You told us, I think, that you wanted to start with waste because it was your personal wish. Now, what if I tell you that many, many European experts agree with me that starting the circular economy, or a better system of recirculating materials in economy, it's wrong to start with a waste. Because we have done waste management for so many years, it didn't really work. So what we need to do now is turn the whole system upside down, not start with the waste, but start at the beginning, not creating waste in the first place, then we don't have to do waste management. So why did you select for that very different approach here?
I completely agree. Is it sounding? Yeah? Okay. No? Now? Okay. I completely agree that you should start by avoiding to make waste in the first place. But I think the problem is that we haven't done that yet to a large scale, and the things that we're pumping out should also be recirculated. Maybe not all of it, because some of it should be banned or by health hazard reasons should move away from that. But the things that are already passed through the system, I think it's a great low-hanging fruit to start there. And I think personally for me, it was a revelation of this against scarcity. The argument that we're running out of resources, but we're not, they're still here. They're just unorganized. And that for me was an eye-opener. I think I wanted to get other people to see that the things are still here, that we just have to take them.
Okay, I mean, generally we're not running out of resources, we're running out of some specific resources, which normally don't end up in the waste, right? So that's a different story, I think. Okay, second question. Now you're talking about the designers, and you're stating that the designers are still very ignorant on this issue of, wait, let me finish, on this issue of waste and how it's related to their design activities. I mean, they know that they have some issues with the waste and they have kind of a responsibility, but still they don't practice it really, despite of the fact that Arne and Han and I and people like us have talked about it, worked on it for the last 30, 40 years even. Well, it's 20 for me. Is it really true, and why do you think is this the case?
I think there's a lot of designers that do engage, and I mean the designers that participated in the first interview study had actively worked with waste as their personal choice as well. So there is hope. There is a group that is engaged and listening to the sustainable design theory and suggestions for tools, but I think that a lot of people within production and from the design field want to make new things, want to make new exciting things. And I think one of the main things, for instance, the fact that we're going to get self-driving cars before a completely recycled car is kind of, it talks about how you want to push things out because it sounds new and exciting rather than because it should be done. And I think we're not as good at picking up the pieces that are actually critical, and we tend to go for the shining bright lights as people. I mean, in general, and I think designers suffer from that as well.
I would have another explanation, and that's something that I really missed in your thesis. Is the business case.
Yes.
If somebody comes to me as a designer and tells me, do this for me, I want 100% recycled stuff in my new product, then of course I will do it. And you're not talking at all or not very much about the whole business case, which for me is the major issue to change the whole system is if anyone can earn money with any part of what you want to change, it will have to be done. I mean, people will be interested in it. If designers are paid by their clients for doing 100% recirculated design, they will do it. So why did you not look into that?
I agree. It's one of the big misses. And I know that to be able to get any of this running long term, it has to be pay for itself, and not only pay for itself, but being a very interesting, profitable. The more profitable, the more people will be engaged in doing it. And the problem is that it is currently too time-consuming and too much effort to be able to make it profitable in comparison to making production with virgin materials. And so the business case actually works against recirculation because it's still cheaper to use raw or virgin. And one of the designers that responded to the survey said, yes, you have to question the need, but you would very rarely choose not to do anything. If somebody's asking you, commissioning you to do something, and you go like, yeah, but you shouldn't really print this out. You should have a web page instead, so you wouldn't put yourself out of a job for people to rethink why they're putting out products. And that's crucial, and that also goes into a topic that I don't debate much, and it's about how much in charge are designers? How much are they actually just responding to what clients want and working for the industries that are hiring them? And how much authority do they have to choose what are the things to be designed? I don't go into that at all either, which is a shame. I think that's very interesting. But it also boils down to, I think, that everybody has a choice at some point. That, yes, you have a mandate from somebody else, but you can always kind of infect that mandate with a hidden agenda of trying to use recirculated materials or etc. So I think I was more interested in trying to influence people into sneaking in.
Okay, I think there are a couple of really interesting case studies with a good business case for recirculated materials.
Yeah, they are.
And I think I wished you had researched a little bit more about that successful business cases.
Yeah, there are several, and
that's fine. It's just a comment.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more. You talked about designing with waste material, and you made this little case studies yourself and compared with the Indian case studies. I think, honestly, being a designer myself, that there are many different ways of using recirculated material in design.
Yeah.
And most of it that we do on a daily basis does not require any different approach in design, because we just specify materials with 100 up to 100% recycled content, and that's it.
Yeah.
It's the same design project. It's just about specifying materials. And I would have wished that you distinguished a little bit the different types of options that we have as a designer, where this recirculated material comes into our design, because it's not always like what you did here, like, hey, we have great recycled materials, what do we do with it? It can also be the other way around. Hey, I have a great design project, can we use recycled materials, right?
Yeah, so. And it happens a lot, as you say, and I would say one of the people involved in that project from Stena Recycling said that, well, we don't realize how much of the things that we have are actually 70, 80, 90% recycled already, because you don't make it explicit necessarily. The designer specifies for I want 100% recycled plastics or fiber or whatever, and then that's the material that they buy in. But the problem is, and that happens a lot, and we don't see it. And then there the lack of information comes out. There's like, yes, it's good that we don't have that you can't see that it's recycled, that it's seamless, but we don't really notice, and then we don't know how much of it is actually recycled. I think it plays both ways, and I think that could be supported more as well, because the material databases, for instance, should have better information on recycled material, secondary material, and that would help greatly in a normal design process when a designer has to choose. It's like, oh, but these are cheaper, and we can just take them in. So I think that there also needs support there. But I totally agree. There's different ways of doing it.
And that brings me to my final question, because also in your conclusions, I think you are a little too general when drawing conclusions, and I would have wished that you had maybe distinguished, again, different contexts, context of industrial versus household waste, context of what kind of products you're talking about, context of which cultural context you're talking about. Different countries are very different, and that. So I had wished that your conclusions could be more specific on that. Why did you not? At the end, did you have enough time?
You never have enough time. But I think it's also. I don't think I had enough material to be able to support that sort of things, because I had only done specific studies that were one of these contexts, so I couldn't compare several of them. It is something that should be done, but it feels like it was a bit much more work than, and it's one of the trade-offs from having such a broad initial question to be able to get down, and your conclusions are also going to be broad. You can't be very, very detailed about that, I think. Yeah. Future work.
Exactly. You can expand it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, I will take over, even though I'm questioning what is left for me. No, first of all, thank you very much. I enjoyed reading it. It's, of course, very nice to see people working in the same area and have different perspectives and so on. And I also think you really did a good job trying to build the bridge between the waste managers on the one side and the designers and the eco-design people and so on the other hand. Because you could say, looking back on these many years, there has been a lot of shouting at each other in the sense of having really different perspectives on this issue. So I think you have done a good job on trying to build this bridge. And I also think you really make clear that there's a huge potential for improvements in this area. So even though we think it's a rather old discussion and circular economy was closing the loop back in time and so on, but I think also the new concepts bring in new perspectives. So that's very nice. I also like your optimistic tone in through the report. It's nearly like Obama. Yes, we can. And I don't mention the change of president. But I agree somehow that I think there's a window of opportunity now if you look into the renewed discussion related to circular economy and also what's coming up from the EU on different EU policies. So I think I have three major questions to you. The one related to the waste management system issues, and the one related to circular economy, and then also a bit about the policies. Yeah. I got the feeling that was only chapter 8 left, and that's the conclusion, and it's 2 pages, and it really reminded me of my own PhD, because that was also 2 pages, and done the night before I should turn it in. So I was thinking perhaps this is the same case, but I was taking the opposite stance than you. I was zooming out. Writing 2 pages about model power, so really broad issue, not answering the question I raised in the beginning. But you are perhaps, as I see it, more zooming in, and I a bit read your, to provoke you, a bit read your conclusion like you are so optimistic person that you think we can fix the system. So I begin with a very general question, and I can back it up.
I think we can fix the system. Yeah, because if you think you can't fix the system, then you won't, basically. And I think I agree. I have kind of a positive tone in throughout the thesis, because I think to be able to propose ways forward is how we should go, rather than just be stuck in how bad we've done it and kind of you know, get just overwhelmed by the difficulties. And I think maybe we can't change this system. Maybe we'll just have to start a new one and start building from the scratch. And I think I've, since a very early age, been a bit of a preparer. Like the system is going to crash. We'll all have to fend for ourselves. I have to be able to fix my basic needs by my own. And so I've always kind of looked into scaling down to be able to then build up, I think. So yeah, either we change the system from within or we just start a new one.
Okay. Yeah, but then you're also somehow indicating that perhaps we should reinvent the system.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
The system should be always questioned, and
Yeah.
it should be always reinvented. When you just end up, oh, but the system, this is the economic system we have, and that's it. Then you're done. You can't improve it. It's there's I think an Arabic saying that says when the house is finished, the family is dead. You're always building your house. You're always making it better. You're always adapting. And when you just assume that the system is done, then it's a dead system.
Yeah. But I was writing because you're looking very much on the barriers. So so in that sense, perhaps you could expect to be more skeptical towards fixing the system, because I wrote down this with the mindset of waste, the lack of incentives for innovation in the current system, the need for institutional change from a linear to a circular system, the lack of policies so far. There's not really been a push. I think it's coming up. You were briefly mentioning the technology lock-in to incineration. So you could make quite a many claims that this is not just an easy fix within the system. It's really rethinking the whole system.
I think so. But I think, and there are a lot of reasons to be pessimistic, if you may. And yeah, the fact that I was looking at barriers, you might have thought that it would have been a bit more of a doomsday thesis in the end. But it's you only fixate on the difficulties to overcome them, because if you're just stuck in the difficulties, then there's no movement forward. Yeah, I think it's important to plan ahead, or kind of stick your head out of the pile of trash.
Yeah. No, but I was thinking one of the figures was this with prevention was only on the top level. I think a really important issue is to redefine and get it down to the preparation for reuse also, because as long as the line is there, we would manage. So that's perhaps even the first step to redefine. Waste is only waste if we have put it in a place where it should be waste. And other cases, it's something that we could reuse and recycle. Recycling, says in Denmark, is forbidden to be waste pickers. You're not allowed to it. People do it anyway, but that's due to the Danish culture. That's really a lot of mindsets that need to be changed and also redefinition.
And I think that need for redefinition comes even when you're formulating policy, and as how the policy that exists today is interpreted even. In some cases, it is within waste management's mandate to prevent waste, and in some places it is not, and like they don't have agency there. So this definition, even the same law within Sweden, for instance, it's interpreted in Malmö, I heard the other day, in a way that allows for waste management agents to channelize funds into generating these resource rooms, etc., whereas in other cities it wasn't. So the money they had could not be used for this waste prevention, even though it is part of their mandate. So there is a lot of things that we still have to work on in that sense, and this redefining and re-understanding how we do things is definitely part of it.
Yes. And also changing the mind, because I think one of the issues is that the main actors in the field, like the waste recycling companies, they think themselves as waste managers, and not having a role in prevention, not having a role in reuse, and even some of the companies in Denmark, I would claim they see themselves as a logistic company, not even considering if it's a waste or something else they drive around with.
But I think I've seen a change, like during these 5 years, I think I've seen a change in attitude from waste management professionals to be much more happy to engage in, we're resource managers and we're recirculating agents. That wasn't there when I started, I have the impression. And there are now several examples of waste management companies that have gone completely reformulated their goals to become recirculators, rather. They still have the quality assurance of environmental protection and etc. But they've moved into product development, and David was telling before about they've separated these plastic pipes that then they've produced again, and so they're engaging much more in recirculation than they were, at least when I started, and I think that has been a very quick change. Actually.
No, I think you're right, and we also see waste companies in Denmark publishing book waste equals resources or whatever, but when it comes to the practice, I don't see the change, because also a lot of the measures are related to collection rates, and it's really poor measure. Yeah. In order to do prevention and do preparation for reuse.
Yeah, and there's a difficulty there of doing preparation for reuse, and can we say that this is waste prevented if it's a waste manager that's been handling it, but they've reused it? So it's a lot of conceptual questions, rather, that shouldn't come in the way of defining what it is that has to be done. Yeah.
Just a few questions related to this with circular economy. I'm a big fan of all your models, but I'm also the type who like to discuss models. and the one you have on page 11, where you have circular economy as the outer one.
Yeah, I think I have that on the presentation, no? Yes. It's coming. This one, I believe. This one.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So my question is, what happened to the power of the inner circles?
Yeah, the power of the inner circles between use and production, or within production, you mean? Or what inner circles?
No, in the Ellen Margato way of drawing it, they have this very inner circles of repair and reuse and so on. But you don't really see it up there.
Yeah, I think it's because it's a different starting point, because those start out at the use phase and go from there back into industrial production. Whereas here, the starting point was the material flow. Instead of kind of like from use, we can maintain and repair and then service this with technicians that can fix it, and then maybe change it out for the newer model, etc. So I think it's just not here because it's a different starting point, rather than because I wanted to ignore it. Okay. Yeah.
You could also answer, but it's in the figure on page 56, I think.
Yes, it is somewhere else, surely. And yes. I think I also have that one, so we can look at. As I was not prepared. This one, wait. You can enjoy a fantastic view of Santiago.
Yep.
While I find the slide. Start slide, so. It doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you in fact have more the reuse there, but still you have the inner. If you go back to the eco design wheel of Hans Brisset from 97, perhaps the first time 94 even.
Yeah. The rethink
Then,
from
you have
now.
the rethink as the zero state,
Yeah.
and then you have also the classical design, the modular system, and issues like that will facilitate a repair, and where you could say there is a big role for the designers also related to these type of issues.
Yeah, I guess this, for those of you that don't know where this comes from, from the interview studies and the web surveys in topic 3, I've categorized the answers I got from designers of how they can affect waste generation or waste reduction. And those categories are what is shown here. And I've structured the categories based again on the product life cycle stages on the top. And the rows are different goals, underlying goals for this, the purpose. So the middle one is resource recovery, which is what I was interested in, material recirculation. But the other goal is reduce resource use, rather. And there is where this question, the need, comes in, and having redesigning and dematerializing as a more radical solution that sometimes is not that easily achieved.
But the value, the really great value of classical design is you can find, in Denmark you can go and buy a new chair. It's so much cheaper than going buy an old one.
Yeah.
Because the old ones have the pads.
They age well.
This.
Yeah.
They gain value.
Yeah.
Wow. It's not upcycling, but it's gaining value is perhaps what it's all about.
Yeah, and there is a research. I remember I met a professor from university in Turkey, and they were looking at materials that aged with value, so that make it more valuable, like leather. That when it's worn, it gets a different character, and so on, and how those considerations should be taken in. And I totally agree. It's a lot there that has to be better exploited, but again, that hasn't been trickled down to the practice of design, and this is basically based on the responses we got from the.
One thing that I was very happy to find up there was the shared use, because then you touch upon all this with the sharing economy also, and of course that was perhaps also a role for the designers to move into this with the product service system. Because I think that is also a way to, if we don't have to own the products but lease them, you'll somehow redefine the rules of the game if with leasing and product service systems and so on, and the business cases.
Yes. But unfortunately, the ones that are circled in white were not mentioned by the designers. And I've included them based on sustainable design literature because there were gaps in the model, basically. And it was like, what, is there nothing here? Yes, of course, there's things here. Designers are just not talking about it. So unfortunately, it wasn't that prominent within the answers we got.
Yes. Well, my last question was perhaps a bit related to this with the policy, because I don't know if you want to share that also.
I could do that.
It's now I have to be the optimistic person, because in fact there is going more on into that field than is perhaps common knowledge today, because as part of the circular package, EU have asked for a standardization process of how to put up standards and measurement methods for durability, reusability, recyclability, and all these words. And I think you are very specific here, and I'm really perhaps even questioning if these ones are areas for policy making, because of course in some cases they could pass laws that increase the transparency, but how to create a market for secondary materials, for example, because as you mentioned before, you can buy nowadays virgin materials that are cheaper than the secondary ones. So that, I think the role of the policy should really be to help facilitate the process of setting up these type of standards that will make durability as a common design issue.
Enforce design for longevity, I agree.
You in fact listed all these issues that should be designed for. And then also because especially at the EU level, I think it's powerful with the eco-design directive if it move away from just the energy minimum requirements into the resource requirements. And then of course the taxes and technology development and stuff like that could also be facilitated from. And I noticed you passed a law in Sweden that reduced the
tax on repair.
So that I think these type of issues are perhaps a bit out of
this
your
scope.
Inside the waste management system.
Yeah, I agree. There are definitely areas that policy could address that are not going to be represented in this circle, like the very well discussed tax on virgin materials or tax breaks on repairing and manufacturing. And I'm not a policy expert. I think that's where my difficulty in addressing more things in this line goes from.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still some questions left. Thank you for this presentation, and it was enjoyable to read your thesis, really. So I have the same impression as the others. We have been talking a lot about recirculation, and if you could change back to the figure that you had just before.
It's coming.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if I understand you correctly, the encircled parts are the scope of your work. That is what you have been focusing on.
No, I have been focusing on the second row here, the resource recovery. The dotted line includes correct disposal with the resource recovery, because that's kind of what has been tagged within the design for end of life umbrella term. But I've been basically focusing on the middle row.
Yeah. So why did you focus on recirculation?
Instead of reducing use?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or, I mean, you're talking about designing, and there are other options than designing for recirculation.
I guess, as I mentioned before, I also agree that the amount of resources used should diminish, the amount of consumption should be questioned and worked against in a way. But I took a starting point where recirculation is desirable, even though might be less consumption, that consumption can go through a circular model is preferable. From an environmental point of view, I think that's why I started there, instead of, because it gets very difficult when you start questioning why people buy things. And I think one of the problems that when saying, okay, we need to have some sustainable consumption, everybody started working about how can we make consumption less environmentally damaged rather than just how can we have less consumption. And I think that's a key, and we should have less consumption. But my work falls into the same trap of not questioning it. I agree.
Yeah, good. Yeah, because I think that is a risk for all this circular economy movement, that you're just focusing on the flows and closing the loops,
rather
and you're not focusing on the throughput.
Yeah. And the throughput should definitely be reduced.
Yeah,
And for designers, one important thing would be to design for longevity.
Yeah.
And maybe designing for shared use. And that falls out of your picture. It's mentioned here and there, but it's not.
I haven't focused on that because there's been a lot of, I think there is a lot of research in design for longevity and product service systems and design for shared use. And there has to be more, but I felt that it was not, there was already a lot of material there. I think there is a big gap in taking that research into the practice rather than, and actually getting things designed to be in recirculating. I think the first interview study I did, one of the designers said, yes, we've been talking about designing for recycling for 30 years, and we've been doing this in the industry, but things are not getting recycled as we planned. Because what happens along the line after is different. It's a little bit this idea of the manufacturing industry throwing a ball that way, expecting to get it back, and then they don't. And then kind of, it's this lack of control within the whole process that makes these wishes of designing for recycling not come through.
Yeah, but I mean, eventually things need to be recycled or recirculated or reused or whatever. But I mean, if you're if the societal challenge is to reduce environmental impact, then design for longevity and to keep materials, so to keep products in use for a longer time.
Yeah.
That would be the first goal. And so I definitely agree that this is needed. But what I think here is a little bit like Ursula said, that you're very general in your statements.
Yeah.
And that also gives the impression that you're covering a lot, but you're not covering certain things.
Yeah.
And when you're presenting this to a designer, maybe there is a risk that you just see, okay, I should recycle, I should design for reuse and remanufacturing, but there are other things that could generate larger environmental benefits.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I do think that there's, in that sense, I would rather refer to other sustainable design literature for that is very well documented and available. To putting tools in the designer's hand. What can the designers do? Have more people done than me. I was more focused on how to get this material back into the system rather.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So another question which also relates a bit to presenting this in a more generalized way than it maybe is that when you're talking about barriers, you're focusing on the barriers of designers and users, like private individuals, but there are other actors with other barriers too in the system.
Yeah, I don't think I agree. Not all the barriers come from either the designers or the users. I think a lot of the barriers come also from the waste management agents or the intermediates to the waste management agents, like the housing companies, like the difficulties that they have in being able to support waste sorting or etc. And I agree, there's much more actors, and I'm far from covering the most of them or all the important ones, I think. And I think I haven't necessarily focused that much on the specific users and their barriers. So, and I think, like, again, the questioning consumption would have been much more, have to focus on the users and the barriers they have to change their patterns. So, yeah, there's more actors in this than I could possibly address.
Yeah. But what about, to give one example, what about the lack of good markets for secondary materials and the costs involved? I mean, that's the first thing that you would talk about, and I don't think you have what hinders material recycling. It was not mentioned.
No, I guess when I've been exposed to the recycling industry, I realized that there's so much knowledge and they have very clear ideas of what their limitation, who they're competing with, the virgin materials, and how they are much harder to get into that price range and these. So I think that branch itself has already highlighted the problems that they have. I guess that's why I didn't go in that way.
Yeah, okay. Right. I was just one more, two more questions, and one question on this figure. You say here that this is an illustration of how designers can work with different actors along the. That's how I interpret it. So,
yeah,
for different questions, like this illustrates with whom to work, or.
It can hint to with whom to work. It's not going to give their contact information. I mean, it's not going to really pinpoint them out. I think it's more that it highlights what stage of the product lifecycle it ends up with in. So the strategies, in which of these, if we're talking about use, for instance, that column, the strategies that you can use to minimize waste at the use stage. So having people be less wasteful when they're using their materials. So that would entail a certain approach, and they would have to focus on the users. But it does not necessarily mean that they'll have to engage with these users, even though you might want them to.
Yeah. I thought I saw that you used the word to be involved with. So I was just thinking about the raw material production sector. It says extraction here, and to question the need of a product with them. It's maybe not the ones that you should involve, but they are the ones that will be affected.
Yeah, exactly. They are the ones that would be affected. But I guess here extraction has also to be interpreted. Secondary material providers are also extracting from landfills instead. But I guess it's also a redefined stage rather than the traditional virgin material.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah. Okay. So my last question, I have to ask you this: what do you think is your own? Because you have been in a number of collaborations, and but then you have done a big chunk of work when you did your summary. But what is your own most important contribution to research?
The one that's most important for me.
Well, yeah. And for your scientific community as well.
I guess the difficulty there is I'm not really sure which scientific community I identify with. So
pick the one that you like.
Yeah. So I think for the recycling branch or the waste management branch is bringing in the design perspective and the user consideration. And within the design branch is reminding about the availability of resources in material flows and the possibilities of incorporating them back. So I think depending on which research community it is I'm addressing, the contribution would be slightly different. Does that answer your question, maybe?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy.
Thank you very much for the questions from the grading committee. And now it's time for anyone to ask questions. If you have any, please raise your hand and I will pass the mic in the words of the Beastie Boys.
Everybody's exhausted.
Yeah. Could anyone in here possibly learn more about waste? Okay, I think there's room for discussions during coffee. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
And I guess all of you don't know where the food is, but a lot of you do. So it's not food.
Cake.
Cake.
It's cake.
No, that's better than food. So just follow the crowd who knows the way. Okay? Thank you.